Hey everyone, and welcome to today's interview where I'm sitting down again with our CEO, Peter Guagenti. Because, Peter, let's be honest, every time we talk, you're just dropping absolute bangers. So we want to keep this coming along as much as we possibly can. And one huge part, and we've talked about it many, many times, we're going to talk about it many more times in the future as well, but it's so salient because I literally just saw this on LinkedIn, what is it, yesterday, something like that, about more and more people talking about how AI has no benefit. It doesn't actually do anything for you, especially when it comes to businesses. So we want to keep hammering this in as many times as we possibly can until people really start to understand and see the benefits. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll just jump straight into the first question for you. So at your keynote address in London, so at the AI Summit London in June, you were kind of highlighting and talking to the leaders in the room about how they need to start with like a clear and measurable North Star for everyone to then start more or less implementing AI into their business. So from a C-suite perspective, how would you go about actually defining that North Star?
It's a great question, and you flatter me with your opening. So thank you. uh, I gotta say, I spend a lot of time just talking to customers, and I'm an absolute sponge for anything I read or I hear, and it sticks. So anything that sounds brilliant coming out of my mouth is not me. It's absolutely what I'm hearing from customers and a lot of people, including in the company, who are smarter than I am. I just have good recall for it all. So thank you. Um, Look, I think the people who are saying there's no value are stuck in the same problem that the customers who come to me and say, "Hey, where do I even begin? What does that look like?" At the end of the day, AI is the application of software to replace human tasks and services. So if you're not directed, or if it's directed at the wrong problems, or it's directed at things that are just not core or beneficial to the business, then you shouldn't expect an outcome. And so there's a bunch of ways of thinking about this, but at the end of the day, in our experience, what AI's benefit always comes down to is what our team likes to describe as efficiency, effectiveness, or experience. And when you think about where to apply AI, think about where you would apply people. Where would you apply other resources within the organization? Don't think of it as something separate from, building a new team or deploying a new capability. Think about it exactly that same way. So, where are you struggling? Do you have efficiency issues, right? Are there parts of your business that are too labor intensive or too time intensive or too costly today? Are you ineffective at something, or do you not have the right capabilities that you can bring to bear against a problem? Are you struggling to hire specific resources or specific capabilities to accomplish a task? Or is there an opportunity to provide a better employee experience or partner experience or customer experience that you see? AI, at the end of the day, these LLMs are the application of knowledge work. That's what they really are. If you think about them at the most fundamental level, what is an LLM is capable of? It's capable of analysis. It's capable of understanding. It's capable of synopsizing and summarization. It's capable of decision making if you give it the right framework to work on. It's capable of taking action on your behalf, just like you would delegate a team or other resources. So applying AI inside of your business looks no different than investing into other capabilities in the business. And in fact, the issue may come from people overthinking it and trying to apply some other new framework or other way of thinking about this. Or frankly, the biggest mistake I see made is like applying IT thinking and IT frameworks to the problem, but that's not what it is. This is actually human capital frameworks are what applies best. And so when I talk to customers, you ask those questions and start asking, they start thinking about it, and then you start digging in and doing the five whys, like, why is that a gap, or why is that an issue, what it is, the stuff emerges pretty fast. And within that, what I always encourage my customers to do is to not boil the ocean. Like, if you found a near term and immediate pain that you think the increased capacity or increased capability of applying AI can add value, grab the MVP version of that. right? Go after the one thing that actually would make that, just significantly enough better that it's worth investing the time. Deal with the change management associated with that, take the learnings that come from that, and then iterate slowly and steadily over time. Have a continuous improvement mindset. And then I got to say, man, the people who are saying that they don't see any benefit, they're clearly doing it wrong. Because every single person I talk to, whether they're using EverWorker or they've just deployed a chat assistant globally across their team, or using the AI coding tools, or using sort of off the shelf stuff that come with some of the software vendors, if they're using it correctly, everyone I talk to is seeing benefit. And that's both inside of their own measures as well as what you see with third party analysis and third party research that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just making a video before this about the same idea. Like when I noticed this, you really do kind of notice that it is probably like almost the algorithm and the idea of social media is like just as much as there are AI influencers, there are now like anti-AI influencers that are starting to rise up as well. So it's probably just a natural part of people trying to get some clicks and views. But you're absolutely right. With that idea of okay, so they've grabbed that initial MVP, they've realized that North Star. But when it comes down to the next step that everyone's looking for, I'm sure you hear it all the time and we talk about it all the time, is that like tangible ROI that is there. Specifically speaking on that, like they're looking to make that first investment to get the first bits of ROI in their company. What would you say is like the first place to start to get that first quick win, basically?
Go back to that framework: efficiency, effectiveness, experience, right? And then work backwards from the goal. What is it you're trying to do? On the efficiency side, I have a number of customers who had offshore business operations teams that were a heavy cost basis for them. So when they approached us and they approached the problem with AI, they were looking and saying, how do I increase free cash flow? Like literally, how do I just increase my margins and cut my cost of either my cost of goods or my cost of operations? And, just having that mindset, then you can look at it and say, okay, well, let's go and figure out what that most significant first cut looks like for you, right? I've got a team, in an offshore location, team of 20, 30 people. They're all doing the same task. The turnover in that job function is incredibly high. I don't typically keep people for more than 9 to 18 months. So I've had to build a bunch of repeatability in exactly how they work and what they do and the processes. What you just described is basically the PRD requirements doc for an AI worker, right? If you can describe a job function that cleanly and that concisely, if the process is that well defined, then that is an AI worker. You can construct that very, very straightforward, right? And that's a great one. Like, business process outsourcing, I think most people in that business are terrified about what's going to happen. There's $300 billion spent on business process outsourcing. And having been on the other side of that as a management consultant myself early in my career, I will tell you, they're usually not great. There's usually a lot of turnover. You have to be super, super rigid in how you execute it. So that's why they know it's ripe for disruption. And that could be a contract team. It could just be that, you've got 20%, 30% of a team inside of your company that's focused on one of these things when they should be focused on other things. So you're not investing that money or that time or that effort into higher value work. Like we see this with HR, for example, where you've got HR teams doing a bunch of back office management. Think about like employee onboarding, employee offboarding, a bunch of the logistical stuff. Like that's not a good use of an HR leader's time. An HR leader's time should be having high quality, high touch experiences with their employees, right? They should be doing things like enablement and ongoing development of their staff. And so, if you look at the efficiency side, it's usually very easy. Like figure out where there's perceived waste, quantify that waste, and if you can construct it, then go after it. The effectiveness side, I think is maybe a little bit more squishy, but it's another one where think about where you're currently capability limited today, right? Data analysis is a really like shockingly interesting one for me. I think we spend a lot of time building dashboards and we build analytics. And all they ever really do is either alert us when something is wrong, which could actually just be an email. I shouldn't have to look at a dashboard to do that. I should just be alerted that it's happening. Or what typically happens with the dashboard is it just begs more questions, right? And so I'm seeing something really interesting, which is a wholesale shift from dashboards to actually AI assistants that have the knowledge to be able to answer questions, right? So, we've built out these robust universal workers. We call them universal workers, these chat assistants that are trained on a specific purpose and have access to specific data. And we see an interaction model where they just send you an email if something gets out of spec, or they send you an email summary every day that says sort of here's where things are at. Like this is what we've done, just like you would if you had a personal assistant, right? Or somebody who's your chief of staff maybe sending you these sorts of notes. And then if you got a question, you could just interact with it. Right. Well, what's going on with this account, or what's happening with with this data that I saw in the product summary you gave me? Like what's happening there? You can ask questions and actually get really good answers. And that idea of sort of the effectiveness of the work you're doing. Think about this sort of combination of what I said with efficiency as well. Like if you can offload common repeatable tasks that are currently being done by your highest value people, how much bandwidth does that give them to do things that are higher order creative or strategic work? And or what if you gave them the capacity of their own analysts or their own researchers or their own even content generation people? What would that do for you? Right? These are all good use cases, right? And then the experience side, man, we are not limited on any ideas for where we could get better customer experiences, better partner experiences, better employee experiences. Actually, there was a phenomenal study that was just released yesterday or sometime this week that actually analyzed using AI for interviewing and candidate screening versus humans being used for interviewing and candidate screening. And it was over 70,000 applicants that had been processed. And what they discovered was AI actually, when AI was used for the interviews, people had to opt in, like, are you comfortable talking to AI instead of talking to a human? And people did. There was actually a high percentage did. But when they did, they actually had a better experience, right? It was more structured. It was more consistent. All the unconscious bias was eliminated when they did it. So they actually saw that there was higher take-up rates, higher retention rates for people who came through AI. Like you can craft with the same amount of budget you can craft more personalized and more high touch experiences with AI than you can with frankly with the staffing limitations we have today, either because of our budgets or we just can't recruit people for certain jobs, right? We're not able to reach those numbers. And so that's the framework I would give businesses and executives who are thinking about this. I want to bring it back though to what I said at the very beginning, which is don't think about it like software. Think about it like those business operations, those business processes, the application of human capital against that problem. What would you do that? If you can have that mindset and you start thinking about what you want that end experience to be, then you can construct something really, really great with AI to solve for it.
So on the other end of that, where we've talked about now, what are those first initial steps? Where should you maybe start? We've said it over and over and over again because it's just shocking that over 80% of AI pilots generally fail, especially when it comes to these larger organizations for a myriad of different reasons. What would you actually say is that kind of most common mistake that most business leaders make when trying to scale those AI initiatives and take them from pilots to actually production? Where do people usually get stuck in that dreaded fate of being in that 80%?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of very different reasons, and there are some patterns that emerge. Not the least of which is actually a skills gap, right? I think that is not the least of it, right? I think a lot of folks approach this as IT projects, and they give it off to their IT team, and they end up getting a double whammy of the limitations of their IT organizations today, which tend to actually, as the software got more and more evolved, and as we spent less and less time sort of innovating in the software we built at our companies and more around maintaining the software we built at our companies, we lost that high touch interaction with the business. So, IT projects themselves fail at over 40%. So it's not like that 80%, it's 80 versus zero. IT projects in general fail at over 40%. And I think there's a pattern that's shared between those and the AI projects of not having a tight enough integration and understanding between the business and what it is you're trying to create. Like you think about Silicon Valley and what makes Silicon Valley so great, it's not actually the engineering. It's the engineering plus product strategy and how those two work together really well. And when I look inside of most organizations, that alignment doesn't always exist. And then the second part of that double whammy is a skills gap, right? That then exists because that IT team has been focused on legacy technologies. Like the best IT team in a Fortune 500 is really about taking care of the stuff that we've been building for the last 40 years. So like you work in something like one of the top 10 banks, they have mainframe, they have, legacy databases from 40 years ago, they have legacy applications that, go all the way back to things like COBOL, but then the majority of it is Java and PHP, which we forget sometimes that Java and PHP are now 25, almost, 25, 30 years old, right? So now you're asking those people who've been writing deterministic software in legacy applications for the last 20 years to go and pivot, and all of a sudden, like, hey, now go do natural language prompting, against an LLM and do so in a way that is, that is rooted in data awareness and data as context. I mean, you may as well just ask them to go and you ask a cat to bark, like at that point, because they've honed their skills and they've honed their capabilities to be able to do a certain thing. And I'm not saying everybody can't pivot. There's plenty of people who do, but we've built our hiring profile to solve for a problem that's very different than the problem we're solving for today. And so my biggest belief here is that the failing actually here is where we are with AI, in my experience, looks like where we were with digital transformation 25 plus years ago. And at that time, what you saw was the business had to be driving it, right? The business had to be upfront. And because it was not about the technology was a tool, it was about business transformation, right? And I think that's what most people are getting wrong right now. They've not reset it and said, okay, well, they think about it as a technology challenge and not thinking about it as a business transformation. So when I look at the projects that have failed, like among my own customer base, when they tell me about what has not worked in the past, what I hear is science projects, stuff without a real clear purpose being done inside of either the IT organization or some specialized body that's sort of off on its own doing something, or I'm seeing experimentation being done at a departmental level without any real clear focus or guidelines or structure, and then what I'm generally seeing is it not being treated as a core business capability. The organizations who are getting it right, even if it's starting small, what they're starting with is people within the operations teams really looking and saying, what do we need to transform in the business to be more effective, to be more efficient, to provide those better experiences? Where they work backwards from the goal and they say, okay, what is it we want to be able to do? Once they do that, they start understanding, okay, what is AI capable of, in that use case? What could we actually now delegate to a GPU instead of to a person? How do we adjust our processes then to incorporate that? Because it's, it is a business transformation. So your processes are probably going to have to shift, right? Where is human in the loop? Where are they not in the loop? How is the decision made? When they do that, even if it's for a small piece of a process, we've seen those win, right? We've seen those do incredibly well. And I stand behind what I said earlier in the interview with you, like start with a seed, start with a small thing, start with something that is going to add meaningful value, but is not trying to boil the ocean. Because I do think that that's the other end of this that I see when I talk to a lot of CEOs. CEOs get super excited about this because they see a whole new way of applying resources to the vast portfolio of things they want to be doing. And, when I get specifications from an ops team, I get things that are finite, structured, very tight. They know exactly what they're trying to do. They have the bigger picture. When I get it from CEOs, they give me like the Iliad. They want like whole chunks of the business they just want to have completely done through AI. They are probably correct, but they're asking for a change inside of their organization that their organization probably couldn't actually take on, right? Because the business transformation is so big within a reasonable period of time. So I'm usually coaching them down and coaching ops people up, right, to do more.
And kind of one of those examples that you even just mentioned there was the idea of data infrastructure more or less being a part of this transformation, of course, as it needs to be. So obviously, we've all heard the adages of like, more or less your AI systems are only as good as your data is, and all that. But most people are they don't want to think about it, or they're like stuck in like a data swamp where it's like ugly, it's disjointed, it's not clean data, and it's kind of just everywhere. What would you say is like a pragmatic approach to this? Is what is the good enough? Like where would it become at this point? This is where it is good enough, where you should now start to implement all of this, or vice versa. When do you know not to start because it's not good enough?
Okay. Um, something controversial that I'll say, and I say this as somebody who actually has helped build robust models and has been in the space of actually constructing LLMs and fine tuning LLMs and doing these other things. I will tell you, your data is good enough, right? Your data is good enough. Unless you are trying to construct a bespoke model for a specific purpose, whatever data you have is good enough. And why do I say that? Because agentic AI, assuming we're talking about agentic AI specifically and leveraging LLMs for operational tasks, I'm going to take out things like, okay, we work with pharmaceutical companies, they're doing drug discovery. That's a different model. Like that is a whole different world. Yes, you need to have data incredibly well structured and curated and prepared to be able to build those models. But for the operational use cases that most of us are talking about doing every day, the sort of 80% of stuff that is the day-to-day operations of a business, I will tell you, the data is good enough and accessible enough because humans use it and access it. So an agent, agentic AI, agents are constructed using a very simple mental model. You have to give them knowledge, you have to give them instructions, and then you have to give them skills, right? And so skills are the obvious one, like read from here, write to here, make a decision on this, and then pull this lever or that lever based on what it is you're doing. The instructions also we understand very well because we're used to prompting, right? Especially for those of us who've been using ChatGPT and these other assistive tools for a long time, we're used to that model, and that's just instructing the LLM looks no different than instructing a human. Like, this is your job, this is what I expect of you, this is how I expect you to make decisions, this is what I want you to do. But the third pillar that I don't think gets enough love or understanding is actually the knowledge required to do the job, right? And the knowledge required to do the job actually takes two forms, right? One is like working memory, like what should you be working with? What's the information you're working with in order to make a decision or to take an action? And then there's just context awareness, like what is the stuff you should have in the back of your mind as you're going, And I think about like, I mean, this is something you use, Austin, right? The AI product marketer use case. Like that AI product marketer has to know your messaging guide, has to know your documentation, has to know your product specifications, has to know your competitive battle cards, has to know other messaging that you've done that has been approved before. That's working knowledge, right? Well, guess what? I just described something that an AI product marketer has to read from 5 different systems, right? Documentation is in Confluence. You've got the messaging guide is actually stored in SharePoint and a Word file. You've got your all your other assets are in some document repository, maybe in PDF format, et cetera, et cetera. The data scientist view of the world is, all that data should be normalized, should be in one place, should be in a warehouse, and all that stuff. But it doesn't matter, actually. It doesn't have to be, because AI doesn't care where it lives or how it reads it. It just has to go read it, right? And so now you do have to aggregate it in a place for things, what we call retrieval augmented generation, but like that doesn't have to necessarily be in, first ETL'd into one place. Like a platform like ours, we just go and collect it, and then that becomes the repository that we work off of. And whether you're using EverWorker or you're constructing it yourself, you can do that same thing. You don't have to go and move a bunch of data around. Now, I think that's the reason why I think that's the case, that business people think that, is because they've been told that for the last 6-7 years, right? Because the earliest versions of machine learning and deep learning, and even the use of the LLMs, that's how we had to do things, because the LLMs themselves were weak. The models were weak. We had to go and construct things based on that information, but it's outdated information now. You don't actually have to go and move it. As long as the data is quickly accessible by a human, and ultimately then, for an agent through an API or some other means, or even a web browser, as long as that information is accessible, then it's workable. So you don't have to actually go and try to, consolidate. There's one caveat to what I say, which is garbage in, garbage out. If that AI product marketer, if I gave you an old messaging guide instead of the current messaging guide, you're going to get it wrong, right? So curation is still a part of what we do, but that curation is the same process we do when we coach a human. So if I hired a new product marketer in that same case, I wouldn't give them the old messaging guide. I'd point them at the new one, right? So I think, stop thinking about it like an engineering exercise. Start thinking about it like, how do you delegate a task? How do you delegate work? If you can delegate a task or delegate work to a human, then you can do the same thing to create an AI worker.
Man, that is so good, and like makes us remember like the whole, if it becomes an adage, the best data, like you need to have your data being perfect before you start this. It takes a long time for that adage to then make it to everybody. So just like how even companies right now are just now being like, hey, we're bringing in a chat assistant. It's like, look, that's 3 years old now at this point. Same thing is going to be when it comes down to your data. So wow, that's super good advice, which leads straight into the next idea of like, okay, now we've realized there really isn't that big of a gap that you need that anyone, for the most part, generally speaking, needs to jump over in order to start to just get going now. Last time in our last interview, we talked about just in a general sense what happens when someone sits on the sidelines, and like you said, if you're going to stick your head in the sand, you're going to be left behind by your competitors. But I want to go even a step deeper than that, of like looking into the future of this. So for that company that is just sticking their head in the sand the whole entire time, look out a year to 2 years. What will things look like at that point, especially thinking of 2 years from now, from AI's advancements already?
I'm going to use a different analogy for, especially if you've got folks who are listening to this or watching this who have listened to some of the earlier examples we gave around the issues with not acting, and I'm actually going to reference Mark Andreessen's "Software is Eating the World" now from what is it, 2009, 2010, right? He said something really prophetic then, which ended up really becoming very, very true, which was the software eating the world trend. What he was pointing out was, look, every company needs to become a software company, because the software itself was actually now becoming a competitive lever in the business, right? And he was not just talking about like simple applications that automate simple things. He was actually even then talking about like the really advanced algorithmic stuff that was happening. Like, Uber fundamentally changed transport by building an algorithm that replaced the traditional method that is used for distribution, right? Distribution of resources. Like, pretty remarkable stuff if you really think about it. Like, taxi dispatch. For anybody who ever called a taxi, especially in a place like San Francisco, pre Uber, you know, they just are trying to match a human to somebody who's available. That's all they're trying to do, right? And I remember calling a taxi from the ferry building in San Francisco, and it was over at the other end of California Street, literally on the other side of the city. And they're like, yeah, they'll see you in 30 minutes. Like, they use an algorithm to just change the rules of the game, right? Instead, they used predictive models to figure, well, where will demand be, and where will we typically have ridership, and where are they typically going to and from, and how do we make sure that destination then results in another ride right afterwards? Like, that's the kind of stuff that Andreessen was actually talking about, right? Not just the simple things. And that was only made possible because they had such engineering depth that they could actually go and not just solve for the basic things, they could keep going. And then there it became a compounding effect, because the combination of open source plus cloud resources plus all those things, these people just got really good. Like Google, if you've ever worked inside of Google was not great at writing software. Actually, you can look at almost everything they did after search and advertising and see that they're like a distant third, fourth, or fifth in almost every other category that they were in. So they're actually not as good at software as most people think they are. But you know what Google's really great at? Writing the software that it takes to write software, right? So they gave the world Kubernetes, which is based on their own internal architecture, something called Borg, right? Which allows anybody to ship software really, really fast. I use those examples because I think we're going through something very similar right now. We're at the leading edge of something very similar right now, but it's actually on the business side, right? Because the LLMs really unlock business capability, not IT capability. And what I'm seeing is the early adopters who started using ChatGPT when it came out, who started thinking about how to leverage AI in various tasks and roles, who started doing simple, basic agentic workflows 2 years ago, a year ago. these folks are just now AI centric in their thinking, and they tend to automatically have greater leverage in how they are executing tasks. Forget how they're leveraging AI. Like, they are literally, just because they're used to using AI resources as if they had an extended team around them, they're already operating at 2, 3, 5x efficiency in anything that they're doing. So there's a chasm building, right, between those early adopters and then the people who are coming in behind them, and how efficient and effective they are in their day-to-day work compared to everybody who's sort of still doing it the way they did it in 2022, right, before ChatGPT emerged. And I think that chasm is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's never too late, right? Because you can also, second mover does actually learn from the first mover in many ways, which is also a good thing that you can tap into. But I think if you just put your head down and say, well, I'll just wait and see, I'll just wait and see what happens. The problem is these organizations have an entirely different muscle, right? They have an entirely different skill set than your organization has. And at a certain point, you won't be able to catch up, right? You just simply won't be able to catch up. And you'll be the taxi companies, fighting Uber. You'll be the traditional booksellers who are trying to fight Amazon. You'll be, frankly, you'll be HBO trying to catch up to Netflix, right? And failing miserably, frankly. I think this is the thing that we all have to think about as business leaders is, if this is a new capability and skill that I need to have inside of my organization, then I better get on it, right?
And with all of that really makes me, so you've painted the picture of the what's, the how's, the why's for right now. And you've talked about in our last interview, the journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one. So for a leader that is actually listening to this and saying, you know what, I want to start today. Today is that day. And I called you up, Peter, I want to start right now. Where would you say is that very, very first thing that they should start with right now?
AI education, right? I think that starts more than anything else. I think you've got to get your business people educated on what is happening with this. What is it? How does it work? What does it mean? What are the implications? Like, you have amazingly brilliant people running your company. You would not be a successful business if you didn't have amazing people around you. But at the same time, all of our people are spread really thin, right? When capital got harder to access and the street got much more rigid in how they were thinking about businesses and all that pressure came down, we shed staff, we cut any fat we had in businesses. There's not a lot of people sitting idle. Like, I don't know any company in the Western world that's not at super high individual employee productivity right now. So when are they going to learn this stuff? Right? When are they going to actually go and build those skills? I think we have to actually create structured programs to give people the ability to build these skills. And frankly, the fundamentals for a business person. This is why, as soon as I joined, we went and created this AI fundamentals for business leaders curriculum, because I feel like that is the biggest issue when I talk to my customers around what's going to make them successful. They just need to understand what this is and understand how it works and what the implications are. And then they become better customers. They become more successful on their own. And so I think that's step one. And it includes also giving them access to assistive tools that make sense for their business and in their use cases, right? And this way you can get your people actually building those skills, building those muscles, building that capability. And I'm not the only one who says this, by the way. Gartner says the same. Like, Gartner believes that there's all these great tactical AI tools that are coming with software you've already purchased, and there are things that are specific to job functions that you can actually already have access to. You don't necessarily have to pay more for. And they're encouraging all of their customers and the people they advise, just go and adopt it. Like, the next wave is to do these custom AI workers, the stuff that's bespoke to your business and frankly gives you competitive advantage, right? Because using the off-the-shelf stuff that all of your competitors are using is not going to give you competitive advantage. But the benefits are so clear from a lot of these tools, that there's just active encouragement of, like, build the skill, learn the thing, use the tool, get the benefit, and it'll actually help you understand what step 2 and step 3 is.
So last question for you, and I'm so glad you brought up EverWorker Academy, which, if anyone wants to check that out, for free, you can check it out at workeracademy.ai. So shameless plug there. But then, to go even further into said shameless plug, you being the CEO of EverWorker, and all of this more or less being part of the brainchild of you, all the problems that we've talked about today and every other interview that we're always doing, how would you actually say that EverWorker, especially with us just coming out with our V2 last week, how would you say that EverWorker addresses all of these problems that we've gone over?
Yeah, I mean, keeping the sales pitch to a minimum, what we're trying to solve for with the platform is actually probably best represented in the comment I made earlier about trying to close the gap between AI and the idea and the business itself, right? Because I think a lot of the current methods and tools to create agentic AI and AI applications is in the hands of very, very technical people today. You have to be an AI engineer or a prompt engineer, or data scientist, data engineer, like that's who's doing this stuff. And so like you've got the business out here with an idea, and then you've got IT out here and there, and it's so hard to bridge those two things. And so we've been working really hard with the platform to make it so any business user can create their own AI workers, not dumbing it down, specifically not dumbing it down, because I think there's a lot of personal productivity tools that are incredibly easy to use, but they're incredibly simplistic then, like what they can actually do. We're trying to create, AI workers that can accomplish entire complex tasks and roles consistently, including decision making. But we've been improving the ease of use in that more and more and more every day, and then obviously all the core infrastructure built underneath to sort of abstract away the RAG infrastructure and the LLM orchestration and agent orchestration, all the heavy lifting that goes into the app side of this stuff. And I think V2 for us was a big leap forward. I think it doesn't fully meet my vision yet, right? I want it to be where I was actually on with a CEO from a mid-sized wealth management firm actually last week, and as I was describing how he should be thinking about his strategy for it, he's like, it sounds like I'm in the best position actually to help create many of these things. I was like, honestly, you are, right? And the key is, how do we get it so your right hand, your chief of staff, your operations leaders, your folks who are in the business process every day, how do we get it so they can just sit with you and say, okay, this is what our new way of working is going to look like? We're so close. Like, I think if you're somebody who can build a Marketo campaign or can, work in Segment or work in, administer the basics in Salesforce, I think you can be very successful in EverWorker today. I want it though where even that CEO can just go in and say, hey, I got an idea, I've got a new process I want to run, I'm just going to go and create it myself, right? So we're getting there. And I think the timing is good, because I do feel like in many ways customers are still in that phase of where they're just focused on very specific tasks, very specific roles, and they're trying to build the muscle, right? They're trying to learn how to do it. So I think the timing is great. Like we can today, we help most of our customers actually create these workers, together with them through our services organization or through our partners. Over time though, I can see fast forwarding 3 to 5 years from today where that CEO literally sits down, with an AI chat assistant, in our tool, and within 30 minutes he's got an entirely new process being executed, just like if he would spend 30 minutes writing a job description and sending it to a recruiter.
That's perfect. So, like you said, starting you first need to, build that muscle, but then on top of taking these steps. Well, what's the best way to build muscle? Take that first step. And Peter, thank you so much for breaking it down so easily, even on how people can actually right now take those first steps. So if you're a business leader, I hope that you implement all of this. And if you're interested in learning more from Peter, well, we're going to be having many more interviews with him, like I said, because he just brings in such great insights for us. So Peter, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next interview. Oh, you're still here. Thanks for staying. You know what? Since you lasted this long in the video, as a thank you to you, Peter actually just let me know that he's going to be extending time with him where if you learn something from this interview and you're saying, you know what, I want his insights and I want his help, well, he's offering free consultations for anyone that is interested to help you start to implement some of these ideas into your own business. So if that's something that you're interested in taking advantage of since you lasted this long in the interview, I'll drop the link below where all you have to do is click on it, sign up, and we'll schedule a time with you. Totally free, no sales pitch or anything. We just want to help you implement AI effectively into your business. But now we're actually done. This is not like the Avengers. You don't have to have a second end scene here, okay? We'll see you in the next interview.